Now this is where everything goes sideways, but not the way it's supposed to.
Said it can't be done, but our time has come. We play with fire and burn.
So if you guys saw the last episode, I got the rear end mounted in the El Camino, all the brackets made, everything bolted up, more or less to get it where it's supposed to be, where it's supposed to sit, and figure out how it's gonna look, how it should function, and everything else. It went good, I thought, but then when I put the truck back on the ground, that differential was way too far back. I needed to move the whole unit, the whole assembly, the whole rear drive shaft, the axles, the independent rear suspension, everything had to go forward on the car at least 2 inches. First off, to accomplish this, I had to cut out one of the cross members that was still inside the frame on the stock El Camino chassis. I had to get in there a good 2-3 inches to allow clearance to make a new bracket, and also to clear the differential so that I could adjust the pitch. Because like I was saying in the previous episode, you have to keep the same pitch from the universal joint at the back of the transmission, whatever that line may be, to the universal joint that's on your differential. With a little bit more clearance, I'm able to put the axle and everything back into the chassis to see how it sits. Now fortunately, where I put the bracket tabs already, all I had to do was flop it onto the other side and we're good to go. So I have to cut the back brackets off, make new ones for the front, and continue to make a whole new bracket that's gonna catch the front end, the front assembly. And like I said before, maintain that pitch. It's gonna grab the front of the differential where the universal joint attaches. Now that I get to start piecing it all back together, it worked out that on the rear end, the tabs that I had welded in, the front tab was the right spot, the back tab wasn't. So I was able just to bring everything over to the front side of that tab, the mount that I had already built, and then just build on from there. So I already have a pretty good idea of the height and where it's gonna sit inside the chassis. Those numbers are still good, those are still there because of the remaining pieces. All I had to do now was refabricate some pieces to get in the new spots. Now I was able to take everything off the back fairly easily from getting around inside the car where I welded it, and initially I'd only really tack welded it in place, but I did a pretty solid tack weld, so it was quite short to get it undone, but just keep grinding. Even though I'm pretty confident that my measurements the first time around were pretty right on for height and spacing inside the chassis rails and everything else, it still doesn't hurt to check everything over and over again. Measure twice, cut once. That's what they always say. So why not measure like 10 times and hopefully get it right the first time. So I measured from left to right, from front to back on each end of the mounting points, and then I also cross-cornered the measurement to make sure it's all squared off. If you can get the same measurement when you're crossing from your exterior left side to your interior right, pretty much know you're on the right track at that point. Because if the measurements work out up and down, left to right, and then diagonally, everything matches, everything's squared off, you're good. The easiest way I found so far to make templates for the mounting brackets I needed for the rear differential was to use cardboard, because it's easy to cut, it's easy to bend, it's easy to move, and if you screw up, well, it's only a piece of cardboard and it probably took you 30 seconds. So what I do is I take the cardboard and I cut it basically loosely to fit, and then I bring it inside. I check my angles, I check if everything's flush, if all my clearances are good. You want your contact, your metal to metal, to be as close as possible to get a good solid weld in there. So I was able to find the proper angles and the proper degrees of cuts and everything else I needed with the cardboard, putting it in, taking it out, cut a little bit, trim it a little bit, fit it, and then I could take the cardboard template and mark it out on the sheet metal that AJ got me for doing all the chassis work on this car. And that makes life pretty easy, and it's a good way to figure out where you're going. Then after everything's all marked out and I know the sizes that I need from my cardboard templates, transfer that to the steel, make my lines, make my measurements, make sure everything is squared, straight, everything is calculated properly, then I can start cutting it up. Simplest way is I just take a grinder with a cutting wheel and go at it. Try to stay straight, try to stay steady. If you're really smooth and you take your time and concentrate on it, you can do some pretty straight cuts with a grinder freehand. But in the instances where I needed a little bit extra help, I just took my vice grips and a piece of flat bar, put it down on the measurements, clamped it down so it wouldn't move, and then I ran the side of the cutting blade along that, making every line nice, straight, and always right on the money. A little trick I picked up over the years: when you're trying to mark a spot to put a hole in, I learned this from the RC car days and how to put your body pins on in the straight, proper spot and get the body mounted properly, is how to make a little guide for where you're gonna pierce the hole with the drill. I made my template and everything so that I could lock it into place and then hold it up against the bracket for the differential. I dip the end of the bolt that's gonna be used here in some grease and slide it through. That way when it makes contact with the bracket that I'm making, it'll leave a little grease spot exactly where the hole needs to be. And then it's just as simple as taking it over to the bench and using your punch to put a hole in it where punch a notch, punch a little divot, whatever you want to call it, into exactly where you're going to drill your hole. That way, once you get your drill into it, your drill bit's not going to walk around off the mark that you put with a marker or a pen or something or a pencil, and it's going to stay true and it's going to stay straight and you'll get through it in no time. Now I drill a few pilot holes with the hand drill and then moving on to the bigger drill press, slowly going bigger size drill every time to make the hole for the bracket as big as I need it. I'm basically doing steps. Keep enlarging the drill size, bore out the hole to the proper size you need, and I gave myself a little bit of clearance here. I made the hole a little bigger than it needed to be to make it go in easier and make sure that everything is kind of lined up straight and properly, and I hope it works. After I had all the holes bored out to the proper size, I took my grinder to clean it up, because when you use a drill press, it kind of makes a mess. It gives you a lot of burrs around the area that you're working on. Plus I just cut this out with a grinding wheel, so there's all kinds of like sharp edges, burrs on it, and you want it nice and smooth, so number one, you don't cut yourself up, number two, it looks good. And to get the inside of the hole that I just drilled, I took my stepper bit and the hand drill and just jammed it in there, moved it around a little bit, because this stepper bit was severely damaged from previous work that I'd done. I probably almost snapped my wrist a few times doing this too, but it got the job done. It deburred everything I needed, and now it looks good, looks clean. I can stick it together. Now that I had a bracket made for one side, it's time to move on to the next side. Now it's fairly simple, because realistically all I have to do is make a copy of the bracket just flopped over to the other side so that everything fits and bolts up properly. So I just traced out the original bracket that I made, then I cut it out of the sheet metal that AJ provided me with, that I've been using for all the other stuff on this truck, and I got the proper size. It fit right in. The only thing I didn't do was I didn't use the same hole in the same spot as the other one, because you want to make sure that you get it right on both sides, and if there's anything that's maybe a little bit different in the bracketry or a bushing that's kind of worn out, it's going to give you a little bit of a different measurement. And I didn't want to have a problem where I couldn't get the bolts in properly or had to jam them or hammer them in or anything. So I redid the process with the grease to find the exact spot to make the hole for the bracket, punched it with the hammer, and then drilled away, made the holes bigger, bored them out, cleaned them up, made it look good. Time to move on to the next bracket. Simply had to make a center bracket for everything now to hold the center of the differential in. I'd already made one, but I had to chop it all out and then move it forward a few inches. So now it was time to redo it and get the proper distance that I need from that cross member that's already there. Now there's not too much left of it because I had to dig in pretty deep, and I'm thinking that later on I'm gonna have to get rid of this and make something a little more solid. But for now, my objective, my goal is to get this thing back on the ground on 4 wheels, see how it sits, see how it articulates, make sure everything moves, make sure everything clears, make sure everything's gonna be okay, and then I'll start worrying about other stuff like that. Now a lot of the same process was used. I used the drills in the exact same way, make the holes bigger, clean them up with a grinder, deburred them once again, and now I have all my bracketry together. Everything fits, everything's cool. I can get it all 4 wheels back on it and back on the ground, see how it works. I never said it was gonna be easy. I knew it wasn't gonna be easy. I knew it was gonna be a challenge. Everything up to this point had been going so well. Something had to happen. There's always a hiccup, there's always something going on. But I found another problem. Everything looks good, everything looks cool. The car's sitting back on the ground, back on 4 wheels. And in my dismay or unhappiness about the outcome of what happens here, I don't even think I filmed it. But basically, everything fit together well, everything fit together nice. Like I had said much earlier, I measured before even attempting to put this in, and everything looked good because the Corvette axles and everything, the whole mounting points, all those parts fit inside the frame rails with just a little less than ½ inch on each side to clear, which meant making these brackets like I did was actually very easy, very straightforward. Wasn't too complicated, except for the first error where I kind of screwed up the distances, but that was my fault. I put the wheels too far back. I've learned from that mistake. I measured up everything. I measured 100 times. I checked 100 times. Everything was cool. But you know, it's always those things that you don't look for that catch you. So this is what's up. I get it all together. I get it all mounted, put some wheels on it. Looks cool, looks good. So I hop in the bed, simulate a bit of weight, start jumping on it, see how it's gonna move. And I have like an inch of travel. I'm bottoming out on something. Upon further inspection, I realized that all the end links for the sway bars in the back, the mounting brackets for those, and also the mounting back brackets for the trailing arms and all the parts that go to that, and the brake lines are landing directly in the frame. Because this frame is probably 3 to 4 inches wider on each side than a Corvette frame, I didn't calculate for everything that stuck out of the hubs and everything that needed to move, and I didn't even look at a Corvette before. I didn't see how that was mounted. Come to realize now that the Corvette subframes and the Corvette differential and everything is mounted beneath the frame, not inside of it like it's sitting on the El Camino, but underneath it, and the mounts come down straight from the top, right down, grab all the brackets, and that way when the wheels compress, when the suspension starts working, you have all this room, all this clearance in there, and the frame passes right by all those components. So I have a major issue now. I have to figure this out. How am I gonna get these to clear the frame and still maintain structural integrity? Then I have to get my ladder bars to run in properly, to hold the axles where they're supposed to be, and those brackets come right out into the frame. At this point, this is the second attempt, the second failure of getting the rear suspension to work, and I initially thought this would be the easy part. I thought it'd be straightforward, cut, weld, drop it in there, it's gonna be fine. Boy, was I wrong. The front end worked out way better than the back end. Now I'm trying to figure out what to do. I'm starting to look at it, and I'm starting to think that the only thing I can do is cut this thing in half. Cut the frame right behind the driver's seats and make kick-ups of my own, make my whole rear end of the frame out of nothing. No plans, no diagrams, just me, some tools, some measurements, and a welder. That's for another video. I gotta chop the frame out. The stock frame on that El Camino has gotta go.
Step into my